bringing you some breakouts and sleepers for week 7 fantasy football. And we're starting it off with player number 1. It's going to be our first breakout. It is going to be Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens. And yes, Zay Flowers has had a pretty good season so far in fantasy football. Wide receiver 18 on a points per game basis. When we're looking at him last week versus Washington, had 22 fantasy points in full PPR, 19 fantasy points the week before that. So you're going to say to me, well, Caleb, he's absolutely broke out the last 2 weeks. Why are we considering the fact that he can do better? Because last week he did have 9 targets for 132 yards. My thing is, when we are looking at this matchup this week versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we have the Vegas prediction being at 48.5 points. So this is going to be a high scoring game according to Vegas, which I'm super pumped about, which is going to give Zay Flowers all the opportunities that he needs to have a breakout game. Now, if you think 19 and 22 fantasy points is not just a full breakout, I am predicting over 25 fantasy points this week in my heart of hearts. We are going with that for Zay Flowers, making a bold prediction, a bold breakout for Zay Flowers this week in fantasy football. We move on to our second player that we think is going to break out for fantasy football. It is going to be Darnell Mooney. And Darnell Mooney, the breakout in the sense that it's already happened was week 5 versus Tampa Bay when that dude got 16 targets, 9 receptions, 405 yards. But he comes back in this week 6 game versus Carolina and only puts up 6.8 fantasy points. So if you are a guy that owns Darnell Mooney or you picked him up off the waiver wire, you're definitely a little bit concerned going forward. But we definitely love this matchup versus Seattle for Darnell Mooney because we think it's his time to get back on track. So I am predicting Darnell Mooney to get 20 fantasy points this week as a breakout. Yes, is it maybe not the full level breakout that he had in week 5 fantasy football? Sure, I hear you and understand you if you are one that say, Caleb, that's not a full breakout. But I do think Darnell Mooney will be a breakout this week for week 7 fantasy football. Absolutely love this matchup versus Seattle. We'll have to see going forward how that's going to impact Kirk Cousins and this Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson offense continues to move. But I do think Darnell Mooney is in a good spot, especially with the target share and the snap share that he's been seeing over the last few weeks. We move on to our third level breakout, and it's going to be Jordan Addison for the Minnesota Vikings. And Jordan Addison, since he came back from injury, we've seen a lot of things that we like that week 4 game versus the Green Bay Packers where he put up 22 fantasy points. But him in this London game, it just was not an ideal game for Jordan Addison at all, with only 6.6 fantasy points in full PPR, had an 89% snap share, 8 total targets for 3 receptions. And that's the part that makes me excited because the week before versus Green Bay, of course, he did have 22 fantasy points, 4 targets, 3 receptions for 72 yards and a total touchdown. So I think as we are continuing to see this overall offense, it's going to continue to be a good show for Jordan Addison with Sam Darnold. Vegas has a pretty high... The over-under total for the game, according to Vegas, for the Lions and Vikings is a 50-point over-under, which means they're projecting this to be a high-scoring game, which I am super pumped about for Jordan Addison because I do think the Lions are going to get up early, and like they said, they always like to run the ball, and it's going to force the Vikings to really throw in the second half, which is only going to benefit a guy like Jordan Addison going forward. I have Jordan Addison, like I said, ranked right now as my wide receiver 24. I would not be surprised if we see Jordan Addison eclipse that 20-point mark. That is why I have him as a breakout in this overall video. The next guy we're going to be talking about as a breakout, and maybe this video, like some of these guys, it shouldn't feel like a breakout, but at this point in the season, I'm gonna say it is. It's going to be Achane for the Miami Dolphins. And yes, the breakout happened in week 1 and week 2, 23 and 29 fantasy points, but since then 8, 5 and 2 fantasy points before they went on bye. This week, the Miami Dolphins are going up against the Indianapolis Colts, who have definitely not been the best defense. And we have got Anthony Richardson coming back, which honestly, Joe Flacco's been absolutely cooking for the Indianapolis Colts. So what is that going to do for this Indianapolis Colts offense? I think that's going to give Miami Dolphins a better chance at least having a shot. Now, Devon in that week 5 game, of course, he did only play in 14% of the snaps because he went out with a concussion. He is looking good. He logged a full practice on Thursday. This is coming out on Friday. So excited to see what Devon's going to be able to do. I do think he gets back to having a 20-point fantasy football outing. I think he makes it work in this offense, even with a guy like Tyler Huntley at the helm. We move on to my last and final breakout player, and it's going to be Drake Maye, quarterback for the New England Patriots. Now, there's a few different things that we need to see. Apparently on Wednesday, Drake Maye went and had an MRI. A lot of people were worried, but then on Thursday, he ended up logging a full practice. So that's the part that's exciting for Drake Maye because it looks like he's going to be, of course, full good to go versus Jacksonville Jaguars over in that London game. And we saw Drake Maye last week against a pretty good Houston Texans defense put up 21 fantasy points. Now going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I understand the offensive line, the weapons, nothing's an an ideal circumstance for Drake Maye, but the part that I do want to talk about with Drake Maye is he did it versus Houston. Why can't he not do it against the Jacksonville Jaguars? I always know London games are a little bit sketchy to bet on or to predict, but I do think Drake Maye ends up eclipsing 23 fantasy points this week. I think he's a great level breakout to add, and especially if you're kind of debating you don't have a top 6, top 7 quarterback, Drake Maye is definitely in consideration for you as a start-sit decision. Now, moving on to the sleepers for this week, the first guy we're going to be talking about is going to be Tyrone Tracy, and yes, Tyrone Tracy has fully broken out, so you're going to say to me, well, Caleb, the last 2 weeks he's had 14 and 22 fantasy points. Why are we worried about Tyrone Tracy? Why are we labeling him as a sleeper? Well, one of the things that we're going to need to determine is when Devin Singletary is going to come back into this offense. But based on these last 2 weeks of having a 63 and 84% snap share and putting up 14, 22 fantasy points, he's had 18, 17 carries in both those games. I think Tyrone Tracy has earned the right to at least be part of this committee, if not to get more work. And this matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles, they got Malik Neighbors back. You got Wan'Dale Robinson, who's been cooking on the outside. I just think it's a tougher matchup, so I hear you. But if you're in a super desperate spot in your running back room, I don't think it's terrible to start Tyrone Tracy, even if Devin Singletary is going to be playing. Definitely think it's a great matchup. Think Tyrone Tracy is a great sleeper to be starting this week. The next sleeper that, if you're desperate, that I would potentially be looking at is going to be Romeo Doubs for the Green Bay Packers. And we've talked about Tucker Kraft as a guy that we love starting this week, but Romeo last week, 19 fantasy points versus the Arizona Cardinals. Now, he did score 2 touchdowns, so a lot of that was that touchdown upside. But when we're looking at the 3 wide receiver sets, it's still Romeo, Jaden Reed, and Christian Watson as the top 3 wide receivers, as Dontavian Wicks continues to slide in for either Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs. So Romeo being a top 3 wide receiver in this offense is exciting, especially with this matchup versus the Houston Texans, where we expect it to be high scoring because you got the CJ Stroud, Jordan Love level duo. So I do think it's really worth it for Romeo to be another sleeper. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be debating, do I start Romeo as a start-sit decision? If you have a start-sit decision, ask me down below. If you're also one of the 84% of people that aren't subscribed, please subscribe. We're on the way to 4,000 subscribers. But Romeo Doubs, I do think, is a great sleeper to be participating in this week. The next sleeper that I think you need to be considering this week is going to be Rashod Batman for the Ravens. And we are looking at Rashod Batman putting up the best football season of his career, which is kind of crazy because the last 2 weeks we've had 15 and 11 fantasy football days in full PPR from Rashod Batman. And as much as we have Zay Flowers, we think Zay Flowers is in for quite the day. I also think of Rashod Batman, another option in this passing attack, is definitely a sleeper you need to be considering. Definitely look at some Rashod Batman. I understand there's always the worry, there's always the concern that, hey, Rashod Batman, he looks good, but who am I starting him over? So if you have a start-sit decision with the sleeper, I do think Rashod Batman could definitely reemerge this week. We could be looking at somewhere finishing between the 10 to 15 point mark, which is a great level value for Rashod Batman. Now, we're going to end off with 2 more sleepers, but I just wanted to say, guys, I appreciate all the love that you guys have been giving me here recently. So thank you so much. Continue to keep it up. I'm helping you win a fantasy football championship in 2024. Next guy we're going to talk about is going to be Pop Douglas. And the same reason that I like Drake Maye as a breakout, I continue to like Demario Douglas as a sleeper. Now, Demario Douglas, the last 2 weeks, 11 and 21 fantasy points. So you're going to say to me, Caleb, maybe he should end up in the breakout conversation. And I think that's definitely a valid argument to be making. The definitions when we talk breakouts and sleepers, I understand. Maybe you should say, Caleb, I want a breakout to be someone that's never done it before. I want a sleeper to be someone super deep. Well, Demario Douglas, he's right now like a wide receiver 4. So he is a super deep guy going up against Jacksonville. The same reasons that I like Drake Maye are the same reasons that I like a guy like a Pop Douglas. I still think Pop Douglas as the clear one. He's emerging as that guy. Super electric. I call him a poor man's Antonio Brown. I exactly think that is what Pop Douglas is, and that is why you need to be considering some Pop Douglas as a sleeper this week. And my last and final sleeper that I will bring to you is going to be Xavier Legette for the Carolina Panthers. And we talked about Xavier Legette as a really great waiver wire pickup a few weeks ago, but since that time, Xavier Legette, it's kind of been up and down. So he put up the 19 fantasy points in week 4, then had 1 fantasy point in week 5, and then put up 11 fantasy points in week 6. So this week against Washington, we think this is going to be a higher scoring matchup just because the Washington Commanders, the offense is absolutely humming. So to keep up, the Carolina Panthers are going to have to throw the ball down the field. Now, for him last week, really, he had 4 targets for 3 receptions and had that 1 total touchdown. So it does seem to be almost touchdown or bust for Xavier Legette day, but he's continued to run in those 3 wide receiver sets. And let's not forget, he was their first round draft pick. I'm not saying Andy Dalton is the solution. This Carolina Panthers team is still struggling to win games, even with Andy Dalton, but we have to like where Xavier Legette is currently playing as a sleeper, especially if you're in a deeper league and or having some really rough injury bye week decisions. So if you like fantasy football, if you like winning, hit that like and subscribe button. We will be going live later tonight at 9 Eastern Standard Time. I want you here in the community. I want you to ask those questions. So hit that like and subscribe button, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.